Okay, let's talk about rhetorical analysis. This should look pretty familiar to you because we went over these notes earlier. So, what I did as I was reading the real Lord of the Flies is anything that stood out as part of a pattern, the way he is using, there we go, such as the way he uses a lot of first person, anything that stood out to me as being a particularly strong phrase, but seldom is a story only a story. Stories can also be nocebos. Anything that stood out, I went ahead and I pulled it out. Now, as I was pulling it out, I started creating these patterns. So I had quotes like this wild creature, naked, screaming, the Polynesian custom of dumping dangerous criminals on remote islands. These did not necessarily occur all together. I pulled them together because these all sort of describe the boys in very negative terms. Here, I know all these first persons come scattered all throughout the piece. But as I was taking notes, I pulled them all together so that I had them all in one place and I could start building a pattern. But once I've pulled all my quotes, once I know what rhetorical choices the authors have kind of used, it's time for me to start thinking about how I'm going to write a rhetorical analysis. And the centerpiece of the rhetorical analysis is the thesis. If you do not have a thesis, you cannot write a rhetorical analysis. Because when you're analyzing rhetoric, what you're saying is what choice has the author made that helps to drive his message. And if you don't have the message, then you don't know where you're supposed to be going with your rhetoric. So what has to go into the actual thesis? Well, you need to have the title. Whoops. I can type. Yes, I can. You need to have the author. You need to identify at least two rhetorical choices. If I could spell it right. And you need to know what message the author is trying to drive. And once you have those, you can put those in any order you want. But those are the things that have to go into your actual thesis statement. So, title. The title of the piece is Humankind. Now, if you're doing it, you would have the real Lord of the Flies because you read only that selection. I read the whole book, so I'm using the book, Humankind. Author, we definitely are going to have the same author, and that's going to be Rutger Bregman. Rhetorical choices. Now, this is where I start looking at the notes I pulled. If I group my notes as I went, and by the way, I would normally write these out on paper so that I had the paper in front of me and I could refer to it more easily as I was typing. But, whatever floats your boat. But I can see that one rhetorical choice I have here is his choice to use first person. Another choice is he is making a choice to talk about, to sort of focus on the value of Lord of the Flies. Now, we know he hates it, and yet rhetorically, he's spending some time complimenting it, probably to create a connection with his audience. We know he is making a choice to describe the boys. He's making a choice to describe the boys first in sort of negative terms and then in far more positive terms. Now, if you notice, I'm not going with like fancy dancy literature terms. If you want to, great. So if you want to talk about, hey, there's a wonderful juxtapositioning of negative against positive terms in his diction while describing the boys. Great, good for you. They're not going to give you bonus points for that. They are looking for whether you can recognize the choices the author is making. They're not looking for you to get like all fancy dancy. And then finally, he makes a choice to really focus on the obstacles. That Ada had been deserted, that had been cursed, the foaming water crashing down. So those are the choices that he's making. Now, my question is, which choices best drive the message? Do y'all see what the problem is there? Oh, yeah. If you don't have a message, you don't know what rhetorical choices to pull. By the way, this does not fit under any particular pattern. It's still a beautiful quote. And if I were going to write a whole essay, I would actually probably pull that quote out for my introduction because it is sort of a gorgeous quote that really sums up what it is that Bregman is trying to say. But what do I need to have? I need to have what is it that Bregman is trying to say? Well, give this one a try. People should give their own species more credit. Well, we have two problems here. Problem number one, this is a should statement. I always tell my kids, don't should on your theme. Because if you should on your theme, it's not a theme. It's not a message. If you say to me, well, people shouldn't steal, I'm going to say you're right. But is that a truth of the world? Is that a message? Can you say that people don't steal? No. A message should be a truth, something that an author is trying to convince you of. Should statements are immature statements of what you want children to hold on to as a lesson. I don't want you to be talking in terms of children. So, no morals. I want messages. Second problem here is this is an idiom. Credit is what you have when somebody offers to give you money or to loan you something. That's an idiom. It shouldn't be here. I'm looking for a clear statement of truth. Oftentimes, if you're trying to get a clear statement of truth, a DC-IC sentence is going to really help you out. If this, then that. When this, then that. That's oftentimes, it helps you focus on a main idea, your independent clause, while still allowing you to have that dependent clause that gives you a little richness and a little bit of complexity in the message. When people are critical of the human race. Now, is that an idea in Bregman? Sure, he talks about how people are critical of the human race. Does he agree with that? No. Well, then it's really nice to put that into a dependent clause because anything that is behind that dependent subordinating conjunction, this is my dependent idea, meaning it's less important. So when people are critical of the human race, oh my gosh, this keyboard, they ignore the evidence that humanity is ethical. This is now my independent clause, which means it's my main idea. So I am looking for what choices what choices Bregman uses to prove that humanity is ethical. First person, could I stretch it? Yeah, maybe. I could. Because I could talk about, how he himself is going on a journey of starting in this place where people are critical and he has to learn how to find that evidence that humanity is ethical. And just like he has been on this journey, that by couching it in terms of first person, he's really showing you that he is standing on the same path that all you pessimists that hate human beings are standing on. And he is proving that if he can learn to think better of humans, that we can as well. So I could certainly make that argument. But honestly, I think this is going to be a far stronger rhetorical choice. And specifically, his choice to describe the boys in this contrast between the negative and the positive descriptors. So one choice really is contrast in the descriptions but of course, my other choice is his choice to use first person. Which of those two is stronger? Definitely this one. And if this one is stronger, where does it have to go in the thesis? First or second? Yep, that has to be the second place, because we want any essay or any paragraph to build up to a point, which means you always save the best for last. And that way it feels like your reading is building up to a more and more powerful point. Does it matter what order you put these elements in? The title, the author, the rhetorical choice, the message? Absolutely not. So I could have Rutger Bregman wrote Humankind in order to prove that when people are critical of the human race, they often ignore evidence that humanity is ethical, period. He chose the use of first person and contrast in the description of the boys to drive home that message. Wait, time out. Can I divide my thesis in half that way? Ding, 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 ding. I can. It's fine if your thesis is in 2 sentences. You don't have a formula here. And if you go online and find these fancy dancy formulas, like here is a formula for the perfect AP thesis, AP will actually grade you down for following a formula too closely. What they want to know is that you can think for yourself, not that you're following a formula. So you can put these elements in any order you want. Rutger Bregman uses contrast and first-person narration to prove when people are critical of the human race, they ignore the evidence that humanity is ethical, and does this in his novel Humankind. Okay, that one's a little bit awkward. It still works. My point is that you need to have 1 or 2 sentences that are going to very clearly pull out what are the rhetorical choices that you're going to focus on, and what message do those rhetorical choices push. So you need to really start thinking about Aristotle's triangle. So in Humankind, Rutger Bregman uses first-person narration and contrast to prove that when, and then I'm going to copy paste. People are critical of the human race, they ignore the evidence that humanity is ethical. That is my thesis. And what I'm going to tell you is you need to start writing the thesis at the top of the paragraphs that you are writing, because you need to have a really, really clear sense of where you're going and what your message is before you start writing. Now, if you're going to write an entire essay, well, then you're going to write both rhetorical choices. So if you're going to write an entire essay, there is body paragraph 1 there is body paragraph 2. If all I'm asking you for is one body paragraph, which one are you going to write? Well, that comes down to the order that we put them in. You put them in the order of good, better. Well, if you're only going to write one paragraph, you better write the better paragraph. So, whatever that second element is in the thesis, that would be the paragraph that you develop if all you have to write is one body paragraph. So that's a thesis. Now, if that's my thesis and all I'm going to develop is contrast, that means all these other things, I'm actually going to ignore them. I loved that quote about the nocebos. It's a beautiful quote, but it doesn't matter how good the quote is. If it doesn't fit within the rhetorical choice that you are focusing on, you have to let it go. Do not try and shoehorn in a quote that doesn't fit the pattern that you are focusing on. So I'm going to get rid of things that do not prove my point. Now, that still leaves me with far more quotes than I could reasonably use. Well, good, because now I'm in the situation where I get to pick my best. So I am set up to write a really good paragraph. So in the next Ed puzzle, let's write that paragraph together.